We welcome you once again to our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast. This week we're looking at Jesus Christ once again, as we've been doing for several weeks. Our focus this week was going to be on his death and the significance of his death. So we often, of course, think about that as we contemplate Jesus Christ. We often go directly, take a straight beeline to the cross and his death for us. But like all wonderful truths, it's easy to take it for granted or just kind of almost make it a cliche. And so we want to pause for a little bit this week and look at the death of Jesus Christ, what took place, and how it matters to us. We'll start today by looking at what death is. Death itself, the word, it basically means separation. So it doesn't mean that somebody has ceased to exist in a sense. In a sense, all human beings will live forever. Either in heaven or hell, they will exist forever, and so we never cease to be. But death means separation. So as I have often mentioned here, and probably even on this broadcast, we're born, first of all, separated from God, and if we continue in that state forever, then we will be separated from Him for eternity. That's eternal death. That's the second death. The first death is the physical death, in which we will all die physically unless the Lord comes back before we die. And so that's separation from our body. And so we have these three kinds of separation: the physical death, separation from the body; spiritual death, separation from God; and eternal death, which was a separation from Him for all eternity, known in the book of Revelation as the second death. So death means separation. So when Jesus died on the cross, He was separated from His body for a period of time. His body died, His spirit did not. In the book of Matthew, for example, chapter 27 and verse 50, we see these words, "And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up His spirit." So that was the point of His death at the cross. His body died. He yielded up the spirit. The spirit moved on, and we'll probably talk about that a little later on, but His spirit continued to exist. Then if we back up to verse 46, it speaks of what else happened at the cross, His spiritual death, we might call it that. Take a look. Verse 46, "Now the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So this is the great spiritual separation the Lord had in some way concerning His separation from the Father. So let's back up for a little bit. In Christian tradition, there is a lot of camping out on the details of the crucifixion. A lot of our tradition, a lot of our accounts go into great detail about the agony of the cross, physical agony in which Jesus Christ died, what he went through, what He suffered, what the crucifixion was, as being one of the most cruel forms of execution ever invented. And all that is true. But that is not, interesting enough, what the Scriptures camp out on. The four Gospels, do not go into great detail about what Jesus experienced physically and so forth. There are indications there. There is comments there. And we know what crucifixion was and what Jesus had to endure. But the authors of Scripture, under the Holy Spirit's inspiration, doesn't camp out there. Instead, it points to more significance of His death. And we find not only the great agony of physical death, there's the agony of some form of spiritual separation from the Father and the Son. When Jesus cried out at Gethsemane, as we looked at last week, asking the Father to spare Him this awful event, I think perhaps his agony was more concerning the spiritual separation. And in this passage here, He calls out for God and says, "Why have you forsaken me?" A quote from the Old Testament, by the way. He's not saying that there is some sense He ceased to be God, or in some sense the Trinity was severed. That is not possible. It didn't happen. And so there's a separation here that's pretty much beyond our comprehension. But it seems to be some form of a fellowship separation between the Father and Son that for at least a moment in time, maybe longer, the Son did not have that close fellowship that he had experienced throughout all eternity with the Father. And it was an agonizing death for us. He died for us in our place. So there is the death of Christ, the physical death, the spiritual death, if we want to call it that, or at least separation to some degree, in some way, from the Father himself. Christ did that for us. Now we're going to talk about the significance of that as we carry forward throughout the rest of the week. So I hope you can be with us as we look at that.